He thought their smiles were threats. The Arcturan scout expected torture, not hospitality. Vexlor crouched in his cell, surrounded by human technology humming with strange energy. When they brought him food instead of interrogation tools, his entire understanding of warfare shattered. Their teeth-baring grins weren't aggression. They were something far more dangerous to his imperial conditioning. This cultural misinterpretation started a galactic war. Now he holds the key to stopping it. The cell door hissed open. Vexlor braced for the expected interrogation tools: neural probes, truth serums, pain inducers. Every Arcturan military doctrine outlined standard prisoner processing protocols. Immediate sensory deprivation, followed by systematic pressure application. His training manuals contained detailed schematics of human torture devices, psychological warfare techniques, and physiological stress points. Instead, a human guard entered carrying a warm meal tray. The scent of cooked proteins and carbohydrates filled the sterile cell. No instruments, no restraints. Just a simple plastic tray with compartments containing unfamiliar food items. The guard's expression showed exposed teeth in what Vexlor's threat assessment training classified as a dominance display. Arcturan intelligence files contained extensive analysis of human facial musculature, concluding that teeth-baring indicated imminent aggression. Yet the guard moved with relaxed posture, placed the tray on the bench, and made a soft clicking sound with his mouth. Military doctrines across the galaxy treat prisoners as intelligence assets to be exploited. Yet here the humans employed what their own cultural anthropology called commensality, the bonding ritual of shared meals. Historical records show this pattern across human conflicts, from ancient warrior cultures to modern insurgencies, where breaking bread often preceded breaking deadlocks. Vexlor's internal threat analysis subsystems flagged multiple contradictions. The temperature of the food indicated recent preparation, not standard prison rations. The guard's body language showed no defensive positioning. His internal monologue raced through tactical possibilities: psychological warfare, chemical manipulation, or some advanced interrogation technique his files hadn't documented. Prisoner treatment standards vary wildly across military cultures. Some emphasize isolation, others use sensory overload, but none match this approach. The Geneva Conventions, Hague Regulations, and modern interstellar accords all frame captivity through security and intelligence extraction, not hospitality. He watched the guard's movements, analyzing each motion for hidden threats. The human's eyes held no malice, only a curious patience as he waited near the door. Cultural shock began overriding Vexlor's combat programming as he realized the teeth-baring wasn't aggression, but something more destabilizing: an invitation. This simple act of delivering food violated every assumption about human behavior his species had compiled through decades of surveillance and analysis. The realization created cognitive dissonance strong enough to temporarily override his military conditioning. The guard's smile wasn't a threat display, but a communication attempt, a cultural signal his people had catastrophically misread. This fundamental error in cross-species interpretation explained the failed first contact and subsequent hostilities. As Vexlor cautiously reached for the utensils, he understood that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or tactics, but their confounding social rituals. This meal represented a deeper strategic vulnerability than any military secret. When the guard returned later, Vexlor attempted to show deference through his species' honor grimace. Vexlor adopted the traditional honor grimace as the guard approached his tray, pulling his lips tight across his teeth in what his culture understood as ultimate submission. Every Arcturan cadet learned this expression during basic training, a nonverbal signal reserved for acknowledging superior officers or surrendering to honorable foes. The facial configuration involved specific muscle contractions around the mouth and eyes that communicated non-resistance in Arcturan society. The human guard immediately stepped back, hand moving toward his sidearm. His own expression shifted to what Vexlor's training classified as heightened alert status. Instead of recognizing the deference, the human saw bared teeth and tightened facial muscles as direct challenge. Cross-cultural communication studies show that less than 30% of facial expressions translate accurately between species with different evolutionary backgrounds. Human smile recognition programming identified Vexlor's grimace as falling within aggressive expression parameters. Military threat assessment protocols kicked in automatically. The guards' training emphasized rapid response to potential hostile movements, with particular attention to facial cues that might precede attack. Human security forces receive extensive instruction in reading micro-expressions during high-stress interactions, but their database contained no reference points for Arcturan nonverbal communication patterns. The guard responded to perceived aggression with his own culture's pacification signal, a broad smile meant to diffuse tension. Vexler observed the human's teeth display with growing confusion. His own threat assessment subsystems flagged the expression as dominant aggression, creating a feedback loop of misinterpretation. Both species' military training had effectively programmed them to misread each other's most fundamental social signals. This pattern repeated during their disastrous first contact encounter, when Arcturan diplomats attempted to show respect to human ambassadors. Each honor grimace from the Arcturan delegation triggered defensive smiling from the humans, which the Arcturans interpreted as escalating hostility. The misunderstanding created a cascade of diplomatic failures. Security teams on both sides reacted to perceived threats, weapons were drawn, and communications broke down completely. Military anthropologists would later identify this specific expression, mismatch, as the primary catalyst for the conflict. What began as attempted diplomacy rapidly deteriorated into exchanges of fire, with each side convinced the other had initiated hostilities. The entire war stemmed from this fundamental failure in cross-species communication. Recognition dawned on Vexler as he reanalyzed the encounter. His honor grimace and the human smile represented the exact same social intention, non-aggressive communication, yet they triggered opposite interpretations. This single misinterpretation had cost thousands of lives and pushed two civilizations toward total war. The realization created cognitive shock severe enough to override his combat programming temporarily. The guard, seeing Vexler's confused expression, tried another approach. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a colorful plastic object, placing it on the tray beside the empty food containers. The cube-shaped device contained multiple moving parts and colored panels, unlike any tactical equipment Vexler had encountered in his intelligence briefings. Captain Santos entered the cell holding a colorful plastic cube. "Figured you might want something to pass the time," he said, placing the puzzle on the bench. The object contained multiple moving sections with colored panels, a child's toy repurposed as a psychological assessment tool. Santos maintained careful distance, observing how the prisoner would interact with the unfamiliar object. First contact protocols often use abstract problems to gauge intelligence without language barriers, but few commanders would select a toy designed for human children. Vexler examined the cube with intense focus. His multi-jointed fingers tested the mechanism's rotation patterns, mapping the puzzle's mathematical structure. Different species exhibit distinct pattern recognition capabilities. Some rely on visual processing, others on spatial reasoning or computational prediction. The Rubik's Cube specifically tests three-dimensional visualization and algorithmic thinking, skills that translate across technological civilizations. Standard cognitive evaluation in interspecies encounters typically uses more sophisticated equipment, but sometimes simplicity reveals more than complexity. The Arcturan's hands moved with startling precision. He solved the puzzle in under 15 seconds, his fingers executing perfect rotations without hesitation. The guards watching through the monitoring system exchanged stunned glances. This performance placed Vexler's cognitive abilities far beyond human average, demonstrating problem-solving skills that matched Earth's most gifted puzzle masters. Games have served as cultural exchange tools throughout human history, from ancient board games facilitating diplomatic talks to modern video games building international communities. This simple toy had revealed a mind capable of advanced pattern recognition and spatial computation. Santos watched the solved cube with new understanding. This wasn't just a prisoner. This was a strategic intelligence asset with processing capabilities that could be leveraged for peace rather than combat. The demonstration showed shared cognitive frameworks despite biological differences. Both species could recognize patterns, solve complex problems, and appreciate elegant solutions. This suggested common ground existed beneath the cultural misunderstandings that had sparked their conflict. Military thinking began shifting toward diplomatic possibilities. Santos recognized that Vexler's mind represented a bridge between their civilizations, not just a source of tactical intelligence. The prisoner's ability to quickly master an alien puzzle indicated cognitive flexibility that could be applied to resolving their cultural communication breakdown. Historical precedents show that breakthrough negotiations often occur when adversaries discover shared intellectual frameworks beyond their immediate conflict. The captain made a calculated decision. Instead of continuing standard interrogation protocols, he would treat Vexlor as a potential diplomatic intermediary. This required violating numerous military regulations and taking significant personal risk. But the potential payoff justified the danger. If Vexlor could understand human puzzles this quickly, perhaps he could also understand human intentions when properly explained. Santos authorized additional privileges for the prisoner, including access to educational materials about human culture. The guards brought tablets containing historical texts, artistic works, and scientific achievements. Each interaction became a subtle test of Vexlor's ability to process and interpret human information patterns. The results consistently showed exceptional comprehension and analytical capabilities. This cognitive breakthrough created a new strategic option. Instead of viewing Vexlor solely through intelligence extraction parameters, Santos began considering him as a communication channel to the Arcturan High Command. The risk was enormous. Direct contact with enemy leadership violated every standard protocol and could be interpreted as treasonous behavior. But the potential to bypass months of costly warfare through a single clarified communication made the gamble worth considering. The captain prepared to make the most dangerous proposal of his military career. He would offer Vexlor direct communication with his supreme commander, betting everything on the prisoner's ability to convey what humans had failed to communicate through weapons and diplomacy. This required bypassing normal chain of command and risking court-martial. But the alternative was continued interstellar bloodshed, based on a simple misunderstanding. Santos entered the cell with full knowledge that his career might end within the hour. Vexlor made the request calmly, his translated voice carrying weighted significance. Direct communication with Supreme Commander Azix breached every established military protocol governing prisoner handling and interspecies engagement. Standard operating procedures required all enemy contact to flow through designated diplomatic channels, with multiple oversight layers. This bypassed the entire chain of command. Unauthorized military communication carries severe consequences throughout history. During the Earth-Mars conflict of 2145, a lieutenant's attempt to negotiate directly with separatist leaders resulted in court-martial despite preventing bloodshed. The Dominion War saw 3 admirals stripped of rank for attempting back-channel talks. Military law treats such actions as potential treason, prioritizing procedure over potential outcomes. Every training simulation emphasized that protocol exists precisely to prevent well-intentioned officers from making catastrophic mistakes during high-stress situations. Santos calculated the risks with cold precision. Probability models suggested a 70% chance of court-martial, 30% chance of execution if the Arcturans misinterpreted the transmission as a trick. The potential payoff, stopping an interstellar war, justified the personal danger. High-stakes diplomacy often requires violating established rules when standard channels have failed. Historical analysis shows that breakthrough negotiations frequently occur outside official frameworks when individuals take responsibility for unconventional actions. The ethical dilemma tore at his command training. His duty to follow orders conflicted with his responsibility to protect human lives. Military ethics frameworks provide no clear guidance for situations where obedience might cause unnecessary casualties. Command responsibility doctrine emphasizes both following orders and exercising independent judgment when circumstances change radically. Santos weighed the potential deaths of millions against the certainty of his own career destruction. He reviewed the communication security protocols. The transmission would use a narrow-beam quantum channel that Earth's monitoring systems could detect, but not decrypt immediately. This provided a small window before headquarters could intervene. Crisis decision-making research indicates that commanders facing existential threats often must choose between protocol and survival. The Arcturan fleet continued its advance toward Earth's core systems, leaving limited time for conventional diplomacy. Santos authorized the transmission against all regulations. He ordered the communications officer to establish the link, despite the man's repeated objections about procedure violations. The risk calculation shifted when considering that traditional methods had already failed completely. Sometimes breaking rules becomes the only way to achieve strategic objectives when existing systems prove inadequate. He personally supervised the encryption setup, knowing each action added to the treason charges he would face. The communication equipment hummed to life, establishing a direct channel to the Arcturan flagship. This decision represented either brilliant strategy or catastrophic error with no middle ground. Military history remembers officers who took such risks as either visionaries or traitors depending on the outcome. The transmission channel glowed with established connection protocols. Santos nodded to Vexlor, allowing the prisoner to begin speaking to his supreme commander. This moment would determine whether his gamble would save billions or destroy his life. The communication represented humanity's last opportunity to explain their intentions before total war commenced. As Vexlor began speaking in his native language, Santos signaled his science team to prepare the cultural database for transmission. They would need to provide overwhelming evidence to support Vexlor's claims about human nature. The entire collection of human artistic, historical, and social data needed formatting for alien comprehension. Dr. Okafor's team worked against the clock, compiling humanity's cultural archive into a transmission package. Every artistic masterpiece, historical document, and social custom became data points for enemy analysis. This represented the ultimate intelligence gamble, providing an adversary with comprehensive cultural mapping that could reveal strategic vulnerabilities. Cultural anthropology had become a tactical discipline during interstellar expansion, but never before had a species offered its complete psychological profile to an active combatant. The database contained sensitive materials that could be weaponized if misinterpreted. Religious texts might reveal ideological fractures, political documents could expose governance weaknesses, and artistic works might be analyzed for psychological manipulation points. Historical conflicts show that cultural intelligence often proves more valuable than military secrets in prolonged engagements. The science team had to curate carefully, removing information that might be dangerously misconstrued while preserving enough context for accurate interpretation. Cultural anthropology frameworks guided the selection process. The team focused on universal human experiences rather than political narratives, birth rituals, mourning practices, celebration customs. Diplomatic exchanges typically share sanitized versions of culture, but this transmission required raw authenticity to overcome established misconceptions. Information security protocols normally restrict such comprehensive data sharing, but the stakes justified unprecedented transparency. Every selection carried risk assessment calculations, balancing revelation against potential exploitation. The editing process involved constant recalibration. Military psychologists flagged certain artistic movements as potentially alarming. Anthropologists objected to oversimplification of complex traditions, and security analysts warned about revealing too much about human psychological triggers. They structured the data to show cultural evolution rather than static snapshots, demonstrating how human expressions changed meaning across centuries and contexts. The database included comparative analyses showing how similar gestures carried different meanings across human cultures alone. Transmission security became a secondary concern to content accuracy. Standard diplomatic encryption protocols seemed almost irrelevant when sending the keys to understanding human motivation directly to an enemy commander. The team implemented verification markers allowing the Arcturans to confirm the data's authenticity without human intervention. This required developing new validation algorithms that could cross species boundaries without cultural bias. Anticipation built around which elements might actually change Azix's perception. The team analyzed Arcturan cultural frameworks to predict which human behaviors would most contradict their intelligence assessments. Military anthropology suggests that breakthroughs occur when adversaries recognize shared fundamental experiences beneath surface differences. They prioritize data showing human vulnerability, compassion, and social bonding behaviors that directly contradicted the aggressive predator narrative. The resolution came through pattern analysis of smile-related contexts. Cross-referencing thousands of years of human art, literature, and social documentation revealed the consistent non-aggressive meaning behind bared teeth expressions. The team compiled a specialized sub-collection showing smiles in contexts of friendship, parental care, artistic expression, and peaceful greeting. This specific dataset directly addressed the fundamental misunderstanding that had sparked the conflict. They tagged these files as priority viewing for ASIC's review, knowing this cultural evidence might accomplish what weapons and diplomacy had failed to achieve. The transmission package finalized at 3.2 petabytes of curated humanity. Dr. Okafor authorized the data stream. Understanding this represented either unprecedented peacemaking or catastrophic security breach. The cultural database began transmitting toward the Arcturus flagship as Vexler prepared to explain its significance to his supreme commander. The holographic transmission connected Vexler directly to the command deck of the Arcturus flagship. Supreme Commander Azix's imposing form materialized in the cell, his armored silhouette bristling with tactical readouts. The connection represented an unprecedented breach of military hierarchy. A captured junior officer addressing the Supreme Commander without intermediaries. Historical precedents show such direct communication across rank structures almost never occurs outside court-martial proceedings or extreme emergencies. ASICs immediately dismissed the transmission as prisoner delusion or human psychological manipulation. "You have been compromised, Scout," he stated, his vocal processors emitting the flat tone reserved for addressing dishonored personnel. Military hierarchies rely on strict communication protocols precisely to prevent unreliable information from reaching command levels. Subordinates bringing unconventional ideas to leadership typically face immediate rejection unless following established validation channels. The Supreme Commander's first duty was to assume this represented either enemy trickery or mental breakdown. Vexler maintained perfect military posture despite his prisoner status. He presented evidence with calibrated precision, avoiding emotional appeals that would undermine credibility. Persuasive communication under extreme pressure requires balancing factual presentation with appropriate deference. Research on high-stakes military negotiations shows that successful messengers use data-driven arguments while acknowledging their subordinate position. Vexler cited specific behavioral observations, cross-referenced them with human cultural data, and presented logical conclusions without dramatic emphasis. He described the meal delivery incident, the smile misinterpretation, and the puzzle test results. Each point built upon the previous with evidentiary support. Communication dynamics research indicates that persuasive arguments under combat conditions work best when they create cognitive dissonance between existing beliefs and new evidence. Vexler carefully avoided challenging Azix's authority directly, instead presenting information that allowed the commander to draw his own conclusions. This approach respected the hierarchy while introducing paradigm-shifting information. Azix initially resisted, citing intelligence reports that categorized humans as predatory expansionists. His command training emphasized trusting established intelligence over field reports from compromised personnel. Military organizations inherently distrust information that contradicts their operational assumptions, especially when delivered through unauthorized channels. The Supreme Commander's duty was to maintain strategic consistency, unless presented with overwhelming proof. Vexler activated the cultural database transmission, showing sampled data streams alongside his analysis. He demonstrated how human facial expressions carried completely different meanings than Arcturan intelligence had assumed. Persuasion research shows that visual evidence often proves more convincing than verbal arguments in high-stress situations. The combination of data analysis and visual examples created a compelling case that demanded investigation rather than immediate rejection. Azix's posture shifted from dismissive to contemplative. The quality of evidence in Vexler's methodical presentation overcame initial resistance. Military leaders eventually must confront information that contradicts their operational assumptions, though they typically resist initially. The Supreme Commander recognized that dismissing this evidence outright could constitute strategic negligence if the cultural misunderstanding theory proved accurate. HFY agreed to personally examine the cultural database, though he maintained visible skepticism. This represented a monumental concession given the breach of protocol and potential security risks. Leaders rarely engage directly with raw intelligence data, preferring filtered briefings from trusted staff. Azix's willingness to review the material personally indicated both the seriousness of the claim and respect for Vexler's previous service record. The transmission stabilized. As ASIC's command interface began processing the cultural database, his tactical display shifted from battle readiness indicators to data analysis mode. This temporary suspension of combat operations to review evidence represented an unprecedented pause in military proceedings. The entire engagement strategy now hinged on whether human cultural artifacts could convince a warrior commander that his entire strategic framework was based on a fundamental error. ASIC's fingers moved across his control panel, accessing the prioritized smile-related data files. His expression remained unreadable as the first images loaded. Human children laughing, families reuniting, peaceful gatherings where bared teeth signaled joy rather than aggression. The visual evidence began its slow work of challenging decades of military intelligence assessment. ASIC's command display filled with images his intelligence files had never documented. Human children played in green spaces, their faces displaying the same bared teeth expression his analysts had categorized as aggression. The visual evidence contradicted every tactical briefing he'd received about human behavior. Cognitive dissonance began eroding his strategic certainty as the database presented scenario after scenario where smiles signaled comfort, not combat readiness. Military history contains rare instances where visual evidence overrode established intelligence. Satellite imagery changing battlefield decisions, reconnaissance photos revealing concealed forces, drone footage altering engagement protocols. But never before had cultural imagery halted an interstellar fleet advance. ASIC's tactical training emphasized trusting verified intelligence over anomalous data. Yet the volume of contradictory evidence became overwhelming. The most impactful images showed human developmental stages. Infants smiling at caregivers, children laughing during games, families reuniting after separations. Childhood imagery triggers deeper emotional responses across species lines, bypassing some layers of military conditioning. Research indicates that images of youth and vulnerability often disrupt aggression patterns in predator species. ASIC's found himself analyzing hundreds of examples where human facial expressions clearly communicated positive social bonding rather than hostile intent. His command interface flagged the consistency of these expressions across millennia of human history. Ancient sculptures showed smiles, Renaissance paintings depicted them, modern photographs confirmed the pattern. The database included neurological studies demonstrating that human brain activity during smiling corresponded with pleasure centers, not aggression pathways. ASIC's cross-referenced this with Arcturan physiological responses to threat displays. The biological signals didn't match. The realization arrived not as sudden revelation, but as accumulating evidence. His strategic mind processed the data points like tactical variables. If human smiles represented friendship rather than aggression, then their entire first contact response had been catastrophic misinterpretation. His fleet was advancing toward a species that had attempted peaceful communication, not preparation for attack. ASIC's reviewed the initial contact footage with new understanding. Human diplomats had approached with what they considered welcoming expressions, while his security forces interpreted them as threat displays. The subsequent weapons deployment seemed justified based on flawed intelligence analysis. This error had cost ships lives and strategic resources. He focused on one particular image, a human child offering a flower while smiling. The context clearly indicated non-threatening behavior, yet his intelligence filters would have flagged it as potential bait for ambush. The cognitive disconnect between reality and assessment became undeniable. Military leaders face few moments where they must abandon entire strategic frameworks, but this evidence demanded exactly that. ASIC's understood that continuing the conquest would constitute attacking a species based on complete misunderstanding of their basic communication methods. His honor code prohibited engaging enemies without proper cause, and this evidence removed any valid justification for hostilities. The smiles weren't weapons but invitations. His forces had been preparing to destroy beings attempting friendship. The Supreme Commander entered new coordinates into the navigation system. His order would redirect the entire war fleet away from human territory toward the Orion Arm, where actual threats required attention. This decision violated his original mission parameters, but aligned with higher strategic principles. The conquest of Earth halted because a military commander finally understood what human smiles actually meant. ASICS reviewed the final evidence with cold clarity. His command console displayed the entire Warfleet's formation: 47 capital ships, 300 support vessels, and ground invasion forces all positioned for Earth assault. The cultural database had provided overwhelming proof that their strategic justification was flawed. Warrior honor codes demand righteous cause for engagement, and continuing this conquest would violate every principle his culture valued. Military history shows few commanders willing to redirect entire fleets based on new intelligence. But those who did changed outcomes dramatically. His honor system emphasized engaging only honorable foes with clear justification. Attacking a species based on cultural misunderstanding violated core warrior tenets. Research on honor-based military cultures indicates they prioritize ethical engagement over blind obedience to orders. ASICS calculated the honor cost of proceeding versus the honor cost of withdrawal. Strategic redirection required accepting temporary dishonor to achieve greater honor through correct action. His command training emphasized flexibility when evidence contradicts mission parameters. The strategic implications multiplied with each analysis. Redirecting to the Orion Arm meant abandoning prepared battle plans and entering less mapped territory. Logistics chains would need complete recalibration. Fuel consumption projections changed radically, and troop morale would suffer from sudden objective shifts. Decision-making under uncertainty requires commanders to balance multiple variables with incomplete information. ASICS weighed the certainty of attacking the wrong enemy against the uncertainty of engaging the right one elsewhere. His tactical display showed the human homeworld surrounded by defensive systems. Continuing the attack would likely succeed militarily, but fail morally. Honor systems and warrior cultures often value correct action over victory achieved through error. ASICS considered historical precedents where military leaders changed course despite operational costs. The data suggested that proceeding would win a battle, but lose strategic honor. He initiated the fleet-wide communication protocol. Every ship captain received the priority alert signaling major course change. Anticipation built through the command network as officers awaited the fateful order. Fleet redirects of this scale typically require council approval, but battlefield commanders retain emergency authority when circumstances demand immediate action. ASICS transmitted the new coordinates and mission parameters. The order halted all Earth approach vectors and established new navigation plots for the Orion Arm. Resolution arrived not as dramatic declaration but as precise tactical instructions. The conquest of humanity ended with coordinates appearing on navigation screens across the fleet. Ships began reorienting, their massive engines firing in new directions. The war machine that had prepared to crush human civilization now turned toward different objectives. This decision would have political consequences beyond military considerations. The High Council expected conquest, not redirection. Military actions always create political reactions, and this sudden change would trigger intense debate among Arcturan leadership. ASICS accepted that his decision might end his command career, but honor required correct action over career preservation. The fleet movement established new strategic realities that political leaders would need to address. The Orion Arm presented different challenges than the human territories. Intelligence suggested actual hostile forces operated there, not misunderstood Pacific species. This redirection aligned better with warrior honor codes, engaging genuine threats rather than innocent civilizations. The logistical challenges were outweighed by the moral correctness of the decision. ASICS monitored the fleet's reorientation, satisfied that his forces would now fight appropriate enemies. Political fallout began immediately. Council members detected the course change through their monitoring systems. Messages of inquiry flooded the command channel, each demanding explanation for the unauthorized redirection. ASICS prepared to defend his decision against political opposition that valued expansion over ethics. The conquest had ended, but the battle for justification was just beginning. Vexlor returned to Arcturan command as the soldier who stopped a war but broke every protocol. His actions made him uniquely qualified for a role that didn't exist in their military structure. Scout training emphasized observation and reporting, not negotiation and cultural interpretation. Yet his demonstrated understanding of human behavior positioned him as the only officer capable of bridging the communication gap. Military personnel rarely transition directly from combat to diplomacy. Specialized training typically separates these career paths. Cross-cultural liaison roles usually go to personnel with political or linguistic backgrounds, not battlefield veterans. His people viewed him with suspicion rather than gratitude. Saving lives mattered less than violating chain of command in their rigid hierarchy. Social status in warrior cultures depends on adherence to protocol as much as combat success. Vexler faced potential court-martial despite preventing catastrophic conflict. Historical precedents show military innovators often face resistance from traditional structures. The same actions that made him valuable to interspecies relations made him dangerous to established power dynamics. Personal risks multiplied with each promotion possibility. Former comrades might view diplomatic assignment as desertion of warrior principles. Family honor could suffer from association with someone who negotiated rather than fought. Research on social status changes indicates that upward mobility in rigid hierarchies often creates resentment from peers. Vexler would operate without the protection of traditional military backing if assigned to diplomatic duties. ASICs recognized the strategic necessity overriding traditional career paths. The Supreme Commander needed someone who understood both Arcturan discipline and human psychology. Vexler's prisoner experience gave him insights no trained diplomat could match. Cross-cultural liaison research emphasizes using personnel with authentic cross-boundary experience rather than theoretical training. Sometimes the best ambassadors come from unexpected backgrounds. The appointment arrived through direct command override. ASICs bypassed normal assignment protocols to create a new position specifically for Vexler. Interspecies diplomatic liaison had no precedent in their military structure. The role would require developing entirely new communication protocols and relationship frameworks. This represented both extraordinary opportunity and exceptional danger. Success could establish new career paths, while failure would confirm traditionalists' warnings. Vexler accepted the assignment knowing it might isolate him from his own culture. Liaison roles often place individuals between competing loyalties and expectations. His effectiveness would depend on maintaining credibility with both species while belonging completely to neither. Research shows that successful cross-cultural operators develop hybrid identities that traditional structures often distrust. The resolution came through ASIC's formal appointment ceremony. The Supreme Commander used his authority to establish the liaison position, despite political opposition. This created a protective framework for Vexler's unconventional role, while signaling official sanction for the diplomatic approach. The ceremony emphasized honor and service rather than tradition and procedure. Vexler began developing entirely new protocols for human Arcturan interaction. No existing diplomatic frameworks accounted for such fundamentally different communication systems. His first task involved creating expression translation guidelines that would prevent repeat misunderstandings. This required combining military precision with cultural flexibility in unprecedented ways. The liaison office established basic safety protocols for initial interactions. Expression matrices mapped human facial movements to Arcturan social signals. Communication channels implemented redundant verification systems to catch misinterpretations before they escalated. Each protocol represented a bridge between worldviews that had nearly destroyed each other. Human crew members received their first briefing on Arcturan communication customs. They practiced neutral expressions and controlled body language under Vexler's supervision. Early attempts showed how deeply ingrained human nonverbal communication patterns were. The bridge crews would need to unlearn instinctive behaviors to prevent accidental provocation. The bridge crew began their training under Vexler's supervision, practicing expressions that wouldn't trigger threat responses. They worked in pairs before mirrors, attempting to control instinctive human facial movements. Early attempts created awkward contortions that risked being misinterpreted as aggression or mockery. Initial interspecies communication attempts often fail due to ingrained biological responses that override conscious control. The human smile involves over 50 facial muscles working in specific patterns developed through millions of years of social evolution. Learning new nonverbal systems requires overriding deep neurological pathways. Research on cross-species communication shows that biological expression patterns form during critical developmental periods and resist later modification. The bridge crews struggled to maintain neutral expressions while processing complex tactical information. Their training sessions revealed how much human communication relied on subtle facial cues that could signal danger to Arcturan observers. Each attempted adjustment felt unnatural and required constant conscious monitoring. Gradual improvement came through repetitive drills and feedback systems. Vexlor developed real-time monitoring that alerted humans when their expressions approached threatening parameters. Trust-building research indicates that shared vulnerability accelerates cross-species understanding. Both sides admitted their communication limitations openly, creating mutual investment in finding solutions. The awkwardness itself became a bonding mechanism as humans and Arcturans recognized their shared struggle to connect. The breakthrough occurred during a routine systems check. Engineer Petrovsky solved a calibration problem that had frustrated both species technicians. His spontaneous smile of satisfaction was immediately followed by concern about misinterpretation. But the Arcturan officer observing him made a deliberate effort to interpret the expression in context, rather than through threat filters. This moment represented the first genuinely understood smile between their species, recognized not as aggression but as positive emotional expression. The understood smile created immediate shift in bridge dynamics. Subsequent interactions carried less tension as both sides gained confidence in their interpretive abilities. Research on interspecies communication breakthroughs shows that single successful moments can establish patterns for future interactions. The crew began developing hybrid expressions that incorporated elements from both communication systems, creating new nonverbal signals specific to their partnership. This success enabled transition to formal diplomatic arrangements. The Communication Foundation allowed for more complex negotiations about territorial boundaries and interaction protocols. What began as awkward facial practice became the basis for establishing official relations between previously warring species. The first smile opened possibilities that words alone could never have achieved. Territorial negotiations began with both species using their hard-won communication skills. The old battle line slowly transformed into discussed boundaries as diplomats applied their new understanding of cross-cultural expression. Each session built upon the foundation established through those difficult early attempts at nonverbal communication. The smiles that nearly caused interstellar war now helped build its peace. The negotiation table replaced battle formations as both species established preliminary diplomatic contact. Former combat zones became discussion points with destroyed ships marking territory, rather than defending it. Old military suspicions haunted every proposal, with each side interpreting cautious positioning as potential treachery. Post-conflict negotiations always walk this razor's edge. The Korean DMZ establishment required years of talks despite ceasefire agreements, and the Cyprus buffer zone still separates forces decades after hostilities ended. Neutral zones serve as testing grounds for trust before full normalization can occur. Security concerns dominated early discussions. Human delegations wanted minimum distance requirements for Arcturan vessels, while Arcturan commanders demanded surveillance limitations near their borders. This careful balancing act between protection and provocation defines most territorial negotiations after conflict. Research on confidence-building measures shows that small, verifiable agreements create foundation for larger compromises. Both sides implemented gradual force pullbacks rather than immediate demilitarization, allowing mutual observation of compliance. The talks progressed through carefully structured phases. Initial meetings established communication protocols, then moved to mapping boundaries, finally addressing military presence levels. Each session built upon previous agreements while adding new verification mechanisms. Historical precedents like the SALT treaties demonstrate how incremental progress creates stability, where comprehensive solutions might fail. The negotiators used shared mapping systems to define territories without ambiguous zones that could spark future conflicts. Anticipation built toward the first ratified protocols. The initial agreement established a 3-light-year neutral zone between their territories with mutual inspection rights. This created breathing space while allowing observation of each other's activities. The resolution came through compromise on both sides. Humans accepted limited Arcturan patrols near the zone, while Arcturans agreed to unarmed observation platforms. These first protocols established the framework for all future relations, transforming potential flashpoints into managed spaces. The agreed boundaries represented more than territorial divisions. They marked the beginning of structured coexistence. Contact protocols specified communication channels, emergency procedures, and incident investigation methods. This bureaucratic framework might seem dry compared to battlefield drama, but it created the stability needed for relationship development. The negotiations proved both species could prioritize long-term peace over short-term advantage. Long-term implications began unfolding immediately. Economic considerations entered discussions once security frameworks stabilized. Trade routes required protection agreements, resource extraction needed jurisdictional clarity, and civilian travel demanded safety guarantees. Each new discussion built upon the territorial foundation established through those difficult early negotiations. The process demonstrated that even species that nearly destroyed each other could find common ground through structured dialogue. Political reactions to the agreements began forming on both sides. Some factions welcomed the reduced military tension, while others criticized the concessions made. This polarization often accompanies peace processes, with hardliners resisting normalization despite its benefits. The territorial agreement became the first test of whether political leadership could maintain diplomatic momentum against opposition. Its success would determine whether further integration became possible or whether relations stalled at cautious coexistence. The established protocols created templates for handling future incidents without military escalation. Communication channels, investigation procedures, and mediation mechanisms provided alternatives to weapons deployment. This bureaucratic infrastructure often proves more valuable than peace treaties themselves. It creates systems for managing inevitable disputes without violence. The negotiation process itself became a confidence-building measure, demonstrating that both species could discuss differences rather than fight over them. ASICS's fleet redirection reached the High Council as a tactical shockwave. The political fallout began immediately as council members processed the unauthorized course change. Imperial governance systems rely on strict adherence to strategic plans. Commanders executing personal initiatives create instability across multiple sectors. Political reactions to unexpected military shifts follow predictable patterns across empires: initial outrage, factional alignment, then eventual acceptance or condemnation. Hawk factions seized on the breach of protocol. They argued that redirecting forces based on prisoner testimony endangered overall strategic objectives. Their rhetoric emphasized discipline over innovation, citing historical examples where commanders who abandoned missions caused greater conflicts. Dove factions countered that preventing unnecessary warfare demonstrated superior strategic thinking. They referenced instances where flexibility saved resources for more critical engagements. The debate intensified as each side mobilized supporting evidence from military archives. Council dynamics revealed deeper structural tensions. Older members favored traditional expansion doctrines while younger delegates advocated adaptive strategies. Decision-making in imperial systems often balances tradition against changing circumstances. Leadership challenges emerge when new information contradicts established policies. ASICS's decision forced the Council to confront whether their intelligence assessments had been fundamentally flawed. Hawks raised legitimate concerns about precedent. Allowing commanders to redirect fleets based on personal judgment could destabilize entire military structures. Their arguments emphasized that protocol exists precisely to prevent well-intentioned but disastrous decisions. They cited the Malgore incident where similar independent action led to sector-wide conflict. Doves countered with the Syraxis example, where protocol adherence caused preventable losses. Strategic concerns multiplied during deliberations. The Orion campaign required different resources than the Earth conquest. Logistics needed recalibration, supply lines demanded reorganization, and troop morale suffered from sudden objective changes. Some council members questioned whether ASICS's new target offered equivalent strategic value. Others argued that engaging actual threats held more honor than attacking misunderstood civilizations. The council's internal debate reflected broader imperial tensions. Expansionist factions viewed diplomacy as weakness, while pragmatic factions saw it as intelligent resource allocation. Leadership in changing strategic directions requires managing these competing perspectives without causing institutional fracture. The Council had to either endorse ASICS's decision and adjust overall strategy or condemn it and reassert traditional doctrines. After extensive analysis, the Council officially sanctioned the diplomatic approach. This resolution came through careful compromise. ASICS retained command but accepted enhanced oversight. The diplomatic initiative received funding, but within constrained parameters. Imperial governance systems often absorb innovation by tempering it with traditional safeguards. The Council's endorsement signaled that strategic flexibility could coexist with military discipline. This decision established new interstellar relationship frameworks. The approved diplomatic approach included monitoring mechanisms and evaluation benchmarks. Success would lead to expanded relations, while failure would trigger protocol reversion. The Council's conditional support reflected pragmatic governance, allowing innovation while managing risk. The sanctioned approach immediately affected fleet operations. Resources shifted from combat preparation to communication infrastructure. Training programs incorporated cultural education alongside tactical drills. This institutional endorsement transformed ASICS's personal gamble into official policy. The Council's decision demonstrated that even rigid hierarchies could adapt when evidence demanded change. Humanity's command structure received formal notification of the sanctioned diplomacy. Earth's leadership now faced their own strategic calculations about dealing with a formerly hostile empire. The diplomatic initiative created opportunities neither species had anticipated during their initial conflict. Both sides began preparing for structured interactions that might prevent future misunderstandings. Admiral Wong approved the cultural transmission, knowing it might give an enemy every key to human psychology. The command center calculated a 30% success probability against 70% chance of catastrophic intelligence breach. Risk assessment models for existential threats always balance transparency against security, but never with stakes this high. Historical precedents like the Cold War hotline establishment or the Alpha Centauri first contact showed similar high-risk calculations, though with better odds and smaller consequences. The ethical calculations weighed immediate security against potential peace. Moral calculus in military command requires choosing between protecting current intelligence and preventing future conflict. Wong's decision prioritized long-term survival over short-term advantage, betting that cultural understanding might stop what weapons couldn't. Research on existential risk management shows that leaders sometimes must gamble everything when conventional options have failed. The transmission contained humanity's complete cultural footprint: art, history, social structures, psychological patterns. Security protocols normally compartmentalize this information to prevent enemy exploitation. Sending it represented the ultimate vulnerability play, revealing strategic weaknesses that could be weaponized if the Arcturans remained hostile. The 30% success probability meant likely annihilation if the intelligence was misused. Command staff reviewed worst-case projections, showing how each data category could be turned against humanity. Religious texts might reveal ideological fracture points. Artistic works could indicate psychological triggers. Historical documents might expose governance vulnerabilities. Yet the alternative, continuing a war based on misunderstanding, carried its own certainty of destruction. Sometimes the safest action appears to be the most dangerous one. The transmission proceeded despite multiple officers questioning the decision. High-risk diplomatic gambles throughout history often faced internal resistance before proving correct. The calculation wasn't about certainty, but about which uncertainty offered better survival odds. Wong chose the path that might prevent conflict rather than the one that might win it. Success arrived not as dramatic victory, but as gradual realization. The Arcturan fleet changed course, communication channels opened, and hostility decreased. The gamble succeeded beyond worst-case projections, achieving not just ceasefire but potential partnership. Outcomes this positive hadn't appeared in any probability model. They represented statistical outliers that sometimes occur when understanding replaces assumption. The new diplomatic reality required complete strategic recalibration. Security protocols shifted from threat response to trust building. Military resources moved from combat preparation to communication infrastructure. This transition demonstrated how calculated risks can transform entire strategic paradigms when they succeed against the odds. Humanity's cultural transparency became the foundation for interspecies relations. The shared understanding prevented countless potential conflicts that might have arisen from continued misunderstanding. The gamble's success justified its incredible risk, proving that sometimes showing your cards wins more than hiding them. The Orion arm diversion gave both species breathing space to establish proper relations. While the Arcturan fleet engaged actual threats elsewhere, diplomats built frameworks that might prevent future conflicts. This separation of military and diplomatic tracks allowed trust to develop without the pressure of immediate threat. The Arcturan war machine needed a new target after the Earth redirection. An entire invasion force cannot simply power down its weapons and return home. Military redeployments of this scale require immediate alternative objectives to maintain operational readiness and troop morale. History shows that standing armies without clear missions become political liabilities or turn inward dangerously. The Roman legions maintained constant campaigning schedules. Napoleon kept his Grande Armée in perpetual motion, and modern carrier groups rotate through prepared operational theaters. Redirecting such force demanded extensive strategic recalibration. Logistics chains had been established for Earth assault, not Orion arm operations. Fuel consumption profiles changed completely. Supply routes needed replanning, and troop deployment strategies required complete revision. Military logistics for large-scale redirections involve recalculating thousands of variables simultaneously. The Normandy invasion required 2 years of logistical preparation. ASICS's staff had days to recompute their entire campaign. The Orion arm offered strategic value that justified the redirection. Intelligence indicated actual hostile forces operated there, not misunderstood peaceful species. This region contained resource concentrations that supported imperial expansion objectives while engaging genuine threats. Resource allocation in imperial expansion prioritizes sectors with both material value and strategic justification. The Orion campaign would serve military, economic, and political purposes simultaneously. New rules of engagement transformed the campaign's character. Forces operated under strict protocols preventing attacks on non-hostile civilizations. Surveillance preceded engagement. Communication attempts became mandatory, and cultural assessment teams accompanied advance units. These procedures reflected lessons learned from the human misunderstanding. The campaign would expand territory while avoiding unnecessary conflicts. The fleet's reorientation proceeded with remarkable efficiency, given the sudden change. Navigation systems accepted new coordinates, formation patterns adjusted to different spatial conditions, and tactical networks reconfigured for the altered mission profile. Military organizations train for flexibility, but practical redirection of this magnitude tests even the most disciplined forces. The Orion arm presented different strategic challenges than the planned Earth assault. More dispersed targets, less mapped territories, and unfamiliar environmental conditions. Comparative peace with Earth became the campaign's strategic foundation. Without the distraction of the human conflict, forces could concentrate fully on Orion objectives. This separation of military action from diplomatic development allowed both tracks to proceed without interfering with each other. The arrangement demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking, recognizing that some battles require weapons while others require words. The new campaign's objectives focused on clear threats rather than potential misunderstandings. Intelligence identified aggressive species actually expanding into Arcturan territory, not Pacific civilizations accidentally sending wrong signals. This alignment of military action with genuine danger satisfied both strategic and honor requirements. Warriors could engage enemies with clear conscience, knowing they fought actual aggressors. Logistical networks gradually adapted to the new reality. Supply ships altered courses. Maintenance facilities retooled for different equipment needs, and communication arrays realigned with the changed fleet positions. These adjustments occurred while maintaining the peace framework with humanity, demonstrating that military and diplomatic operations could coexist without conflict. The Orion diversion created space for the diplomatic corps to establish proper relations with Earth. While warriors fought actual enemies elsewhere, negotiators built bridges that might prevent future wars. This separation of combat and diplomacy allowed each to develop without compromising the other. The military campaign continued, but now served peaceful coexistence rather than mindless expansion. Human observers monitored the Orion campaign with professional interest. The rules of engagement demonstrated that Arcturan forces could exercise restraint when properly informed. This observation built confidence in the ongoing diplomatic process, showing that military power and ethical conduct could coexist. The diverted conquest fleet became an unwitting peace ambassador through its professional conduct in another theater. Both species faced the impossible task of building diplomatic structures from scratch. Existing protocols assumed some shared cultural foundations, basic communication methods, common social rituals, recognizable power structures. Human and Arcturan interactions possessed none of these starting points. The Vienna Convention provided no guidance for species that misinterpreted smiling as aggression. Every established diplomatic framework collapsed when applied to such fundamentally different consciousnesses. The practical challenges multiplied with each attempted communication. Simple greeting rituals required extensive negotiation. How close to stand, whether to make eye contact, what vocal tones to use. Interspecies communication research offered theoretical models but no practical templates for this specific combination of biological and cultural differences. Teams spent days debating whether handshakes might be interpreted as weapon preparation or friendly gesture. Adaptive governance in new relationships requires creating flexible systems that can evolve through trial and error, rather than imposing rigid structures. They established working groups for each communication channel: verbal, nonverbal, written, and digital. Each group faced unique obstacles. The verbal team discovered that translation algorithms struggled with emotional context. The nonverbal team worked on expression dictionaries that mapped human smiles to Arcturan skin color shifts. Written communication required developing hybrid symbol systems that neither species found naturally intuitive, but both could learn. Digital interfaces needed complete redesign to accommodate different perceptual ranges and processing speeds. Anticipation built toward the first full diplomatic exchange. Both sides prepared extensively, rehearsing every possible interaction scenario. Security teams remained on high alert despite the peaceful intentions. Old suspicions died hard. The meeting location itself became a negotiation point, with neutral orbital stations constructed specifically for these talks. The physical environment was engineered to minimize triggers for either species, with lighting, acoustics, and spatial arrangements carefully calibrated. The first joint protocols were ratified after months of painstaking work. These initial agreements covered basic interaction guidelines, emergency communication procedures, and incident investigation methods. The resolution represented compromise on both sides. Humans accepted certain restrictions on emotional expression. Arcturans agreed to tolerate some human nonverbal leakage. The protocols established frameworks rather than rigid rules, allowing for adaptation as understanding grew. This bureaucratic achievement might seem dry compared to battlefield drama, but it created the stability needed for relationship development. The ratified protocols enabled safe personal interactions between species. Individuals could now meet without fear of accidentally starting another war. This foundation allowed for the gradual development of trust through repeated small interactions. The diplomatic corps had built the infrastructure that made personal connections possible. Individual humans and Arcturans began working together within the new framework. They faced ongoing challenges. Deep-seated cultural differences still caused daily misunderstandings. But now they had established procedures for resolving these incidents without escalation. The protocols provided safety nets that allowed for risk-taking in cross-species relationships. This created conditions where personal bonds could form, despite the significant barriers. The first genuine friendship between human and Arcturan developed slowly through shared professional challenges. A human engineer and Arcturan technician solved a complex docking mechanism problem together. Their success created mutual respect that transcended species differences. This personal connection demonstrated that individual relationships could flourish even while political tensions continued. The diplomatic structures had enabled what seemed impossible months earlier. Engineer Chen and technician Crix worked side by side in the orbital docking bay, their species' first joint maintenance team. The human's instinct to nod agreement triggered Crix's threat assessment programming initially. Cross-cultural friendship formation often begins with such minor misunderstandings that must be overcome repeatedly. Research on interpersonal relationship building shows that shared tasks create bonds where deliberate social efforts fail. They repaired coupling mechanisms together, each learning the other's technical approaches through practical collaboration. Deep-seated cultural differences surfaced daily. Chen's humming while working registered as aggressive vocalization to Crix's audio sensors. Crix's precise movement seemed overly rigid to Chen's improvisational engineering style. These small friction points required constant adjustment from both sides. Studies on overcoming prejudice indicate that personal contact gradually overwrites cultural stereotypes through accumulated positive experiences. Each solved problem built slight mutual respect despite the ongoing misunderstandings. Their breakthrough came during a critical systems failure. Emergency protocols demanded immediate coordinated action beyond their training parameters. Chen's intuitive solution involved physical positioning that violated Arcturan personal space norms. Crix's calculated response required data sharing that breached human security protocols. Both chose to trust rather than follow their respective cultural programming. Research shows that crisis situations often accelerate relationship building by forcing cooperation under pressure. The emergency resolution created professional respect that transformed into personal connection. They began sharing break periods, cautiously exploring each other's cultural backgrounds through limited personal disclosures. Mutual respect grew through recognizing shared professional dedication despite different approaches. Studies on cross-species interaction document this gradual transition from tolerance to appreciation through repeated positive exposure. The first real friendship formed during a routine shift, when Crix observed Chen viewing family images. The human explained the cultural significance of parental relationships, while Crix described Arcturan clan structures. This exchange of personal information represented the transition from colleagues to friends. Interpersonal relationship research indicates that vulnerability sharing often marks the shift from professional to personal connection. They discovered common ground in family values despite biological differences. This personal bond created ripples through their respective communities. Other humans and Arcturans observed the successful interaction and began attempting their own connections. The friendship demonstrated that individual relationships could transcend species barriers that political systems struggled to overcome. Research on prejudice reduction shows that visible successful examples encourage others to attempt similar connections. The broader implications became apparent as more cross-species friendships developed. Political negotiations gained new flexibility as personal relationships built trust between delegations. Military coordination improved as personnel developed working relationships beyond formal protocols. This bottom-up relationship building complemented the top-down diplomatic efforts, creating multiple layers of connection between the species. Personal bonds began affecting operational decisions. Commanders considered friendship networks when assigning joint missions. Logistics planners accounted for personal preferences in team compositions. The human-Arcturan relationships became operational assets rather than social curiosities. This integration of personal connections into formal structures demonstrated how individual friendships can influence larger systemic relationships. The lingering political friction continued despite these personal breakthroughs. Hardliners on both sides viewed these friendships with suspicion, considering them potential security risks or cultural contamination. Some politicians attempted to restrict cross-species interaction, citing traditional values or security concerns. This resistance created ongoing tension between relationship building and political opposition. Hardliners on both sides viewed the peace process as strategic weakness rather than wisdom. Human security councils contained admirals who argued that trusting former enemies violated basic tactical principles. Arcturan war councils featured commanders who considered diplomacy a dishonorable alternative to victory. Political resistance to peace agreements follows predictable patterns. The Camp David Accords faced opposition from Israeli and Egyptian hardliners. The Good Friday Agreement encountered resistance from both Irish Republicans and British Unionists. Hawk-dove dynamics in conflict resolution consistently show that factions benefiting from continued hostilities will resist settlement. Ongoing security concerns provided legitimate arguments for opposition. Human intelligence agencies warned that cultural transparency might still be exploited. Arcturan security forces cautioned that human friendship gestures could conceal long-term infiltration plans. Research on maintaining diplomatic momentum indicates that security establishments naturally resist policies that reduce their operational primacy. The very institutions that protect societies often become obstacles to peace. because their organizational identities form around threat response. The diplomatic process faced continuous sabotage attempts. Human isolationists leaked documents exaggerating Arcturan military capabilities. Arcturan traditionalists staged incidents designed to provoke human security responses. Studies of peace process opposition show that hardliners often create crises to derail negotiations they consider threatening to their interests or ideologies. Both species contained elements that preferred certain conflict over uncertain peace. Leadership managed this opposition through careful balancing of transparency and security. Admiral Wang publicly acknowledged legitimate concerns while implementing confidence-building measures. ASICS maintained military readiness while gradually demonstrating peaceful intentions. Research on overcoming diplomatic resistance emphasizes that leaders must address security fears directly rather than dismissing them. Both commanders integrated skeptical security agencies into the peace process rather than marginalizing them. They committed to the diplomatic path despite ongoing opposition. Wang authorized continued cultural exchanges while strengthening verification systems. ASICS maintained the Orion diversion while enhancing communication protocols. Historical analysis shows that successful peace processes require leaders to withstand political pressure through consistent commitment. The calculation remained clear. The risks of peace were manageable compared to the certainty of war's costs. The resolution came through demonstrating tangible benefits. Reduced military spending allowed both species to reallocate resources to other priorities. Joint security operations against actual threats proved more effective than imagined conflicts. Hawk-dove dynamics gradually shifted as practical successes outweighed theoretical fears. Populations experienced the advantages of cooperation through improved living standards and enhanced security. Leadership maintained momentum through visible confidence-building actions. Wang visited Arcturan installations without excessive security, demonstrating trust through personal risk. ASICS permitted human observation of military operations, showing transparency through practical demonstration. These actions created facts on the ground that opposition groups couldn't easily counter. The diplomatic process developed its own inertia through accumulated small successes. The future outlook remained cautiously optimistic, despite ongoing friction. Political opposition continued but lost influence as peace delivered measurable benefits. Security establishments gradually adapted to their new roles in cooperative defense rather than confrontation. The species moved toward a new normal where disagreement didn't automatically mean hostility. This transition demonstrated that even deeply conflicted, relationships can evolve when leadership maintains commitment against resistance. The new galactic reality began taking shape as both species recognized their shared interests outweighed their differences. Other civilizations observed this unprecedented peace development with great interest, studying how such former enemies could build productive relationships. The human Arcturan detente became a case study in conflict transformation, showing that even interstellar wars could end when understanding replaced assumption. The human Arcturan peace agreement established a new precedent in interstellar conflict resolution. For the first time, two fundamentally different species had moved from total war to structured diplomacy, based on cultural understanding rather than military victory. This outcome challenged centuries of galactic political theory that assumed interspecies conflicts inevitably ended with conquest or stalemate. Single events have changed political landscapes before. The nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki shifted global power dynamics. The fall of the Berlin Wall transformed European relations, but never through peaceful misunderstanding correction. Other species observed this development with intense interest. Diplomatic observers from multiple civilizations requested access to the negotiation protocols. Research on precedent-setting agreements shows that successful conflict resolution models often get adopted across multiple disputes. The human Arcturan framework offered potential templates for resolving other interspecies conflicts that had seemed intractable. Galactic politics traditionally operated through power balances and deterrent strategies, rather than mutual understanding approaches. The broader implications became apparent as news spread through communication networks. Species with long-standing conflicts began re-examining their own cultural assumptions. Research on diplomatic breakthrough effects indicates that successful peace processes create ripple effects that encourage resolution of other disputes. The human Arcturan model demonstrated that even apparently irreconcilable differences might stem from communication failures rather than actual incompatibility. This realization began shifting galactic political calculations away from pure military solutions. Anticipation built around how this would affect future interspecies relations. Would other conflicts see similar diplomatic interventions? Could cultural exchange become a standard conflict resolution tool alongside traditional mediation? The human Arcturan experience suggested that first contact protocols needed complete revision across all spacefaring species. Existing frameworks emphasized threat assessment and defensive positioning rather than mutual understanding building. The resolution solidified as multiple civilizations adopted aspects of the peace model. The human Arcturan conflict resolution framework became standard study material in diplomatic academies across known space. Precedent-setting agreements often achieve their greatest impact through gradual adoption rather than immediate revolution. This particular model's strength lay in its combination of structural protocols and personal relationship building. It addressed both systemic and individual levels simultaneously. The piece's durability surprised many observers. Most conflict resolution models experience significant setbacks during implementation, but the human Arcturan framework maintained momentum through its early stages. This success encouraged other species to attempt similar approaches with their own historical adversaries. The galactic political landscape began shifting from pure power politics toward more nuanced, relationship-based diplomacy. The model's effectiveness derived from its acknowledgement of ongoing challenges, rather than claiming perfect solutions. It included mechanisms for handling inevitable misunderstandings and setbacks without resorting to violence. This practical approach made it more adaptable to different conflict situations than idealistic peace frameworks that ignored continued friction. The recognition that peace requires constant maintenance rather than final victory made the model more durable. Interspecies relations entered a new era where cultural misunderstanding became a solvable problem rather than an inevitable conflict source. The human Arcturan peace demonstrated that even radically different consciousnesses could find common ground through systematic effort and willingness to question assumptions. This shift in galactic political thinking may ultimately prove more significant than the peace itself. The conclusion of this conflict established that sometimes the strongest strategic move is choosing understanding over continued hostility. The most radical strategic decision wasn't firing weapons but questioning assumptions. True strength emerges from accepting vulnerability, not displaying force. This conflict ended because both sides chose interpretation over instinct. Sometimes the optimal tactical move is allowing misunderstanding. The willingness to be misinterpreted created space for clarity to eventually emerge. Peace required accepting temporary confusion for long-term resolution. A simple human expression halted interstellar war, not through intimidation but through persistent clarification. The smile that began the conflict ultimately ended it, proving that communication can achieve what conquest cannot. Understanding remains the final frontier.